right, here we are again. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another show of Hitting the Keynote, where we bring guests in to discuss how you can communicate your critically important ideas, concepts, things, anything to the layperson, to a wide audience, to a small audience. On occasion, there might be a time you're talking to a boardroom and you have to explain the critically important need for you to increase your budget. There might be times where you need to talk to your entire team at work and get them all on board with a certain initiative. Or it could be you're trying to convince your kids to clean up their rooms. All right, we have Paul Van Hatten, who's dialing in from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, to us today. And I found Paul through social media. So I was attending a conference. I'm always sharpening the saw myself as a keynote speaker. And I was attending a conference where Paul was being highlighted as Mr. President. Mr. Prezi with a Z, Dent, or the Z, my American friends. I've been here in America for 30 years. I've still got the accent. So, Mr. President, Paul, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, this is awesome, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, the reason I invited Paul in is because he has started a company, a service that provides Prezis. So Prezi, the tool, we'll explain what that is for people that don't know it. It's not nearly as popular as PowerPoint, but it's an amazingly powerful tool to illustrate our ideas. What do they say? Something like 30% of communication is verbal. The rest is in, your facial expression, the tone of voice, and of course, your illustrations. Now, in our last session on Hitting the Keynote, we had Leo on, who brought a cow, an entire ox, on stage for his TED Talk. Pretty powerful moment, a great illustration. But what about the times when, like this, you're over Zoom or you are in the boardroom where you're definitely not going to bring a cow in? Well, this is the time where you might want to illustrate and punch a point using software. All right, so let's start, Paul. Well, introduce yourself. Who are you, man? And how did you get into this thing? Let's start right there.
Great. So yeah, I'm living in Amsterdam, and that's also where Mr. President is located. We have a small branch office in New York as well. And this whole thing started 10 years ago when I was still in school. And at the same time, I was in university. And at the same time, I was interning at a big advertising agency, Ogilvy in Amsterdam.
Oh, and very famous, man. That's a big advertising agency. Well done. Okay.
Exactly. And I learned so much there. And I was on the strategic planning. And during my internship, we looked for different ways of communicating and pitching as well towards clients. And on one day, we were looking at different tools to create presentations. And somewhere on page 8, this was 2011, somewhere on page 8 on Google, we found something that was called Prezi. And it's a Hungarian presentation software tool. And I started to work a lot with it. And I'll tell a bit later on what Prezi is and how it works. But what I was starting to do is I was creating PowerPoint presentations as I was asked. But then during nighttime or when I was home, I was creating the same presentations in Prezi. And the next day, I showed them both examples, and the team really liked the Prezi, and the client liked that as well.
Give me the main key points as to why you chose to focus on Prezi rather than PowerPoint. And for the audience members listening on MP3, Prezi, I think the website, Paul, is prezi.com. Is that it?
Right. Yeah.
Great. And I think, in fact, there's a free version of the tool that you can actually use, can't you, before you have to start paying for it. So what are the key differentiators between Prezi and PowerPoint?
Yes, the concept behind Prezi is that instead of having to chop your story into slides, is that you can actually use one big overview of your story, and you can literally zoom into, go in depth on specific topics. And that was also really struck me as I'm a visual thinker. And for example, for me, it always has been hard to learn from words, from books. So what I always do is create mind maps or try to sketch certain concepts out. And when I first saw Prezi, it instantly hit me that this tool actually could give me that oversight of information and allow me to deep dive into something and then zoom out again. And that helps the audience to understand what they're seeing.
Yeah, you know, you've touched on a very interesting psychological point for us keynote presenters, which is your mind, so mind mapping software. So I've used XMind, a couple of other mind mapping software over the years. What I love about it is it kind of reflects the neuroplasticity of your mind, right? So it helps you think in a certain manner in which there's more flow. So tell me if you would agree with this. I haven't actually used Prezi for years. It was around the same time that you guys discovered it at Ogilvy and Mather. I started using Prezi a little bit, but in the corporate world, they kept dragging me back to PowerPoint, which is where I'm still today. And this is refreshing my memory and my excitement to maybe start playing with Prezi again, because as a speaker, I was able to flow in a storyline, kind of like a movie director creates a storyboard before they start filming the movie. And I was able to flow in my presentation a lot easier than the sort of chronological movement of a PowerPoint. Would you say that that's probably an accurate description as far as the emotional experience as a presenter?
Yes, definitely. And as an audience, it is, even in storytelling, even if you're in that really emotional part, it's very important to understand where you are, how far you've progressed, and what's still to come. And if you can build a visual language, and Prezi is great in doing that, that shows the audience where you are in your story, and that gives the audience a lot of rest, so they can focus on your messaging instead of focusing to figure out where you are. And sometimes in PowerPoints, it's hard to understand where you are if you're at slide 13.8.9.
Yeah, that's right. I'd never thought of that before. From the audience's perspective, they are trying to figure out the story if there's no flow to it. Where, okay, so this is difficult for us to explain, especially for the MP3 followers. So let's try and set this up. This is great exercise for you and me, right? As far as our vocabulary and our strength of being able to do this. So imagine this, listeners. You've got a canvas there, a big canvas, and you're Picasso, and you're about to paint a picture, right? You want that picture to be in its entirety shown to the audience. So think of, actually, I can't think of a Picasso named picture, but think of Water Lilies by Monet. Everybody's got that one, right? You know, or the Mona Lisa. You want to see the whole picture, but then there are details in the Mona Lisa's smile, right? So then you're zooming in right to the lips, right to the smile, and you're talking about the smile. And then maybe you want to focus on her eyes. Is she really smiling or is she frowning? So much conversation about the Mona Lisa, right? So thank you, Leonardo da Vinci. So then you want to zoom back out, show the whole picture of the Mona Lisa, and then zoom into her eyes and her eyebrow because you're looking for any frown. Is she really smiling? And then coming back out again. Do you see what I mean? Is that kind of a good description of what you're experiencing? Right. So what you were saying then is that the audience, so give me that again, because that was a really key point. The audience is able to follow the storyline. Is that what you were saying?
Exactly. The camera movement that helps you move from that big overview towards the lips really helps you to understand where you are in the story. And that makes it a very powerful visual tool.
Yeah, right. So this is interesting then. I found it a fairly easy software to use. I didn't use it too much. As I say, I got dragged back into the Microsoft world. But there's clearly a need for people like you, because I think your business, you create Prezi, I was going to say PowerPoint, Prezi presentations for third parties. Is that correct? Yes,
that's correct. So when I was still working at Ogilvy, the nickname Mr. President grew on me since I was
okay.
and from that point on, I founded Mr. President as an agency, and we hired. Our team grew, and our designers are helping businesses all over the world to create presentations. So that's how it started out. And Mr. President is now a much broader agency, also creating PowerPoints and all sorts of presentations, but we derive from creating Prezis.
All right, so this is great, because now what I want to move into for our audience's sake is when you receive information from a client, you have to then create the presentation. For our audience members, this is exactly really the same scenario as you being told, okay, you've got a new keynote. It's on this subject at work. Or it could be, pitch to the board of directors because we need to know something about the organization. Okay, So now what I'm going to ask Mr. President, Paul here, is what the thought process is for creation. How do we actually create that? Just because Paul is a separate entity doesn't mean to say that he doesn't go through exactly the same exercise as you would have to if you were going to create your own presentation, be it PowerPoint or be it Prezi. Okay, so Paul, let's start with this. And maybe if you can use a real world scenario, it would be even better, right? You can scrub names for anonymity if you need to, but certainly tell us about a time where a client came to you and said, okay, I need you to present this. So what's the this? And then I'm going to start asking you questions about how you started the presentation. So what can you focus on?
Sure. Yeah. So we create that's the coolest part of our jobs, is that we create presentations for all sorts of companies and all sorts of industries. But one of the great projects that we've been working on in Prezi is a presentation we created for I'm not sure if you know mayonnaise.
No, it's slowly.
It's mayonnaise.
Mayonnaise, sure, yeah, mayonnaise. Okay, so a company that makes mayonnaise, is this a European country?
Yeah, it's a Dutch one. We're really proud of it.
All right. So this Dutch company that makes mayonnaise, they come to you. Why are they coming to you? What's their purpose?
So they were looking for a way to visualize and explain their production process to all sorts of stakeholders, from school children to investors. So
they wanted to show a way that how they produce mayonnaise, how they make it, right?
Exactly.
Okay, this is great. We're literally making lemonade, as we would say over here in America. We're making mayonnaise. All right, cool. All right, so they approach you. So they find your firm and they say, all right, we've got this, we make mayonnaise, and we want you to put a presentation together on how you make mayonnaise. What's the first question that comes out of your mouth?
Well, who's the audience? That's really important starting point for us, because the audience also determines your approach. And what do we want to teach them? So okay. That's where
who was the audience in this case? You mentioned schools. Who else?
Yes. So they get a lot of visits in their factories, but the factory is very loud. So for those of you who've been into the Sistine Chapel in Rome, or in Vatican City.
Sistine Chapel, right? Yeah.
Before entering the Sistine Chapel, there's someone who gives you an explanation of what you're going to see, because you can't talk when you're inside. And the same thing applies to the mayonnaise factory. Since there's so much noise, you can't talk. So someone needs to explain what you're about to see a couple of minutes later. So they want help to do so. Yeah.
Okay, so your audience are school kids, but also anyone who's walking into the factory. So frankly, this is a broad audience. So what are you going to do about that? Now you know it's a broad audience. It's not specific to, say, the CEO, the CFO, and the COO. It's not specific to just a school. How do you change the way you're going to build your presentation knowing that it's a broad audience?
So what we try to do is create different layers of information. And instead of having a linear story, we would have, for example, financial information in this presentation at the end of the factory, where we show production numbers or specific revenue numbers.
Okay.
But we also show the secret recipe of how to make mayonnaise yourself. And the thing is, we make those elements interactive. So instead of going through a linear story, for the school kids, we could bring up the mayonnaise recipe to make it yourself. And for a more professional audience who is also interested in the numbers, you could pull up those numbers.
Okay, so is what you're saying then that the presentation is different depending on the audience? So the school kids see this, but other people see that. Oh, really? So there's somebody who's clicking.
Exactly.
Okay. So depending on the audience, that's interesting. The coin just dropped for me. So ladies and gentlemen, what Paul means by this is in the Prezi software, you can drill in, so let's think of the Mona Lisa, and you can drill into, say, one ear or one cheekbone or, to her chin. And then it zooms back out and you can drill into her eyes. Now, that's beautiful. I never thought about that. In PowerPoint, it's limited because it's linear. You have to go through slide A, B, C. You can't skip forward to F without going through D and E, right? Whereas in Prezi, you can ignore the boring stuff for kids, let's say, the numbers, and just click on this is how the mayonnaise gets made. That's a very, very, that is a unique and powerful feature, because if you as a keynote speaker, as a presenter, are able to have the confidence to move your dialogue on the fly, you can essentially build all sorts of things into your presentation, whether you need them or not. And exactly. It's your choice. I love that. That's really powerful. I'm totally using Prezi again. All right. So you've created now you've created environments for, let's say, the technical people, the adults who want to understand about numbers, how the mayonnaise gets made. What's the next thing you do? How do you illustrate? Let's go to the making of mayonnaise, because that's kind of cool to me. So how do you illustrate the making of mayonnaise? Like, what did you do? Do you start with a blank piece of paper? Talk to me about the creative process. Do you bring your team together? Is it in your head? Well,
yeah. So I for us, it's very, very important to understand what we are telling. So that's step number one. And then when I say we, I worked on this project together with two designers and with support of a project manager as well. So we needed to understand how the mayonnaise was made. So we went to the factory and we got the tour. We could take a lot of pictures. And when we got out of the factory, what we have at the office is a very, very big meeting room table that is completely white, and you can draw on it. So think of a whiteboard but as a table.
Okay.
So then what we started doing was we asked the client over and we started sketching out the process. We had seen these big machines for filling, for mixing, and we started to connect them based on the photos that we made in order to understand what we were seeing. And yeah, that's how we started out, creating an overview for ourselves.
So you are literally pen and paper, as it were, but a cool table. You are drawing, and by the way, you've got a really cool job. Going to see how mayonnaise gets made. It'd be that's really cool. So then you start sketching out the machines, all of the various things. What are you looking for there? Like, how do you decide whether a machine enters into your presentation or not? I mean, surely, there are things that stay on the table that don't make it to a presentation. What makes the director's cut, as it were?
Yes, so for this, we didn't want to create a presentation for manufacturers of those machines. So it didn't have to be that detailed. So we drew boxes with lines connecting them, and this was sort of the detail level that we started out with, and we wanted to get that flow. And once we had that, we started to add a bit more detail to make it also a bit nicer to look at.
Okay, interesting. All right, so you've got a bunch of machines. When you're drawing, you're still drawing by hand here on the table, correct?
Yes, and everyone should know that I can't sketch. My drawings look terrible, but when drawing just squares and connecting them with lines, that actually doesn't matter for me to understand the story. Luckily, my colleagues can sketch and design really nicely.
Key word there, to understand the story. You said you're creating a storyboard already. So that's what that is, right? You're creating a storyboard. Okay. Any tips around the chronology of where, so you've got all this stuff sketched out. So let's imagine a fairly messy table now. You've got all sorts of stuff on there. Where's scene one? Where does that start? How do you pick that out?
So scene one, what we almost always do is that scene one is the overview. So I will try to illustrate what that overview looks like. So what we've created is a landscape, a typical Dutch landscape. And within that landscape is a very big tube of mayonnaise on its side. And that was the overview that we started out with. And at the end of the mayonnaise tube, there's a small office. And at the start of the mayonnaise tube, so where the mayonnaise comes out, there was a big jar and there was a lineup of products.
Okay.
And what we did is all the business-like information, we put that in the office. All the numbers, we put that at the end where we show the products. And we sort of lift it up. We cut out a piece of the mayonnaise tube and we put the entire production process in the tube.
And you could see that then? You could see it in the tube, like a machine. Kind of
Exactly.
like, what's that? Dr. Seuss, you got that machine that does everything? So kind of like that, right? Just a machine.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, because so this wasn't a true representation of that machine, was it? This was just a cartoon machine, is that right? Or was it an actual picture that you'd taken?
No, we illustrated it. Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't. So accuracy of the machine isn't important. It's simply something to represent that this is where the sausage gets made, as it.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's a beautiful picture. So now you can zoom into 3 areas. Is that correct? The office, the machine, and then the end result.
Yes.
Lovely. What was? And you had a bunch of products at the end result. What was that? Talk to us about the end of the tube.
So at the end of the tube, we showed the different types of mayonnaise, the different locations where they were transported to, the different markets. So that was the sort of information that we showed there.
Right. Okay.
And another example, and that's also one of the reasons why we like working with the tool of Prezi. Imagine when I said, when you move into the office, the first building. So the first hotspot in the presentation that you can click on. So the office opens up and you zoom in and you get information on numbers that are there on a piece of paper. But there's also a picture hanging on the wall. And if you click on the picture, you don't have to do that. You can move along. But if you click on the picture, it was an old picture of the founder of the factory. And that would create a timeline of the full history of the company, which was there in the office.
That's very cool. Yeah. So how did you make the decision for all what you've just said? So you made a decision to put a tube of mayonnaise on its side, to have the office, to have the numbers, to have the picture on the wall, which you could click to and get a timeline. Then I imagine, and you can go through this in detail because I want to hear it. When you click on the machinery, that probably shows you something amazing. And then you mentioned transportation. What was the thought process to decide these are the key elements to put in the illustration?
Yeah. I think that's a really fair question, and maybe we should move back a couple of steps.
Yeah.
Once we met Michel, our client there, he approached us with any question a client often has is, we would like to create a presentation and we want to tell a bit about our history as a company. We want to show our production numbers, our production process. So he listed on every company overview presentation, those elements, our mission, our vision, the type of elements that you usually have in a presentation. And what we try to do is look for a visual metaphor to place those elements and tie it together to add this on the message that we want to tell.
Got you. Okay. And then when you click into the machinery in the middle of the tube, what do you see there?
So we get an overview of you get an overview of the machine. So the machine starts with ingredients being thrown into the machine, and then it moves up where it's being centrifuged, and then it's being cooled down, and then you start filling the pots of mayonnaise or the tubes. Okay.
Were these all photographs that you'd taken, or again, drawings?
These were drawings, and some drawings you could actually click on them, and that would pull up the image that the actual image to show the machine.
The actual real machine. I got it. Okay, fantastic. Do you know, so just by, and I hope that this works for the audience as well, but for me, I can see this whole thing in my mind. Because I've used Prezi, I kind of get how it zooms in and out and moves along. It's very cool. For those people who haven't used it, just go to Prezi.com and just start playing. It's free. But I can actually see it in my mind. So I'm getting much more excited about Prezi again than I am about PowerPoint. All right, so let's start talking about, okay, how long did this take you, by the way? What was the process from when you started on that white table of yours to here's the final result?
Yeah, so I think it was important for us to, when we started on the table, to know which elements we wanted to put into the visual. And once we knew that, we sketched it out really roughly. And every iteration, we just added more detail and more design to it. So when you were mentioning a storyboard, you're doing the same thing. You're just adding, it becomes richer and richer and richer. And that also is exactly what our production process is like for presentations. We already know what we're going to create after the first day of work, but then in the next days and weeks, we just add more design elements to it to make it richer and richer. And this process took us somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks.
Okay, 3 or 4 weeks to put the whole thing together. Yeah. Do you do A/B testing on your presentation?
Well, what we do like is to ask a client to show the presentation to someone from the target audience once we have a V1 or V2 to see what the reactions are, and it's not that often that we completely start over what we're doing, but it does add less than 20% of things that we probably just missed, or because we were in too deep, hadn't thought of, and that didn't make sense or could be better by having input from the target audience.
And did you say earlier scene 1 and scene 2? Is that what you're saying? You said you show a few scenes?
No, so versions of what we were creating.
Okay, so do you have different versions or just one version that you test with this audience?
So what we tend to do is either once we have the first full design, so that's what we call the V1, the version 1.
Oh, version V, got you, buddy. Okay, yeah, version 1, version 2. Right, so you turn up with a couple of different versions. They're pretty much the same with a couple of tweaks, yeah?
Yeah.
Gotcha. So what you're looking for there is it flowing well with the audience members?
Yeah.
How do you know? Do you just ask them like which one seems better to you, or are you asking a set of questions so that you can see if they understand the material? Like, how do you know which one, V1 or V2, which one's going to be best?
So what this is also a great moment for the client to actually test his or her story, because that goes hand in hand with what we're creating. And often it's based on honest feedback, having a conversation afterwards. Did you understand what the key message was? Could you repeat the key message? But also, were there things that weren't clear to you, or was that something, what really stood out for you? Those kind of questions.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's pivot then. I love that, by the way, Paul. Thank you. Let's pivot to what are some of the big mistakes people make using Prezi?
Yeah, I think this goes for whether you're using PowerPoint or Prezi or whatsoever, is that a lot of people, when creating presentations, they just start. They start with slide 1, or they just start creating, and then they hope that the presentation will come by itself. But a lot of people skip this step of really planning and thinking out your storyline before creating your presentation. Okay,
so is what you mean there that you should start with the whole picture, right? Create a storyline first and then start creating the presentation.
Exactly. The first steps to take aren't even in the presentation software creation tool, whether it's PowerPoint or Prezi. You start by whether you're sketching it out or working with ID Flip or Post-its or whatever tool. Just try to think of all the topics you want to include in your story. And then once you have them written down, try to organize them for yourself. And once you really have a clear picture of what your storyline is going to look like, then you open up your presentation software.
Yeah, so I'm a keynoter, right? So it's not about sort of advertising a product for me. My company has products, right, which I advertise during my keynotes, but it's about the actual speech, right? It's about the speech. And I always start with mind maps, and I used Xmind, right, for many years. Now I actually get back to pen and paper. I tell you what, Paul, I go from pen and paper, and I go, oh, I'm too frustrated, to software. And then the mind mapping software is kind of so-so, and I go back to pen and paper. Your pen and paper, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm back to pen and paper right now, and I have a mildly large sheet of paper, and I put just the subject in the middle, what I've been asked to keynote about, and then I start drawing lines. And by the end of it, it's just a big, messy document, right? And then I start doing dashed lines to connect concepts together, because I go, oh, hang on, that doesn't belong there. That lives over here and belongs to this one. So all these dashed lines. Then I take that piece of paper, put it aside, fresh sheet of paper, and then I start with all the groupings. So everything that's got the dotted line that's connected becomes one group and another group and another group. And because I went back to PowerPoint years ago and I've been using it for years, then I go linearly with PowerPoint. But what I'm liking about this is getting rid of that whole linear experience, giving the whole picture, exactly what we've said so far in the last half hour, so that that story can come to life. And then I wonder, so do you work with many keynote speakers as well, like guys like me, to build out our presentation?
So the majority of the presentations we create are sales presentations or company overview presentations. But every now and then we do a presentation for large events. So keynote speaker, big stage. And
so that's interesting. So does that person just dump the speech on your lap and say, off you go?
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Those are so in a lot of the company overview or sales presentations, we start with the storyline, and we create the storyline, we help there, and then we do the design and the development. But often when working together with a keynote speaker, they own and know their story. And for us, it's great to have that storyline as input, and then we can think of ways to visualize that, to create visual metaphors, to create that visual environment, that story.
Right. Yeah. I imagine it's harder working with a keynote speaker, isn't it? If they just dump the script on your lap. Yeah, because the imagery might be challenging for you, because in their mind, we all see things very differently, don't we? I want to go so I want to move back to the sales presentation people, because that's interesting. I think that's a large part of my audience, is how to sell complicated things. That is to say, almost anything nowadays, because it's all online, everything's complicated, to a wide or a small audience. Okay, so a company approaches you and they say, hey, we want you to help build a presentation to showcase this specific product. So what are you doing? Same thing as mayonnaise. You are literally starting with a whiteboard and you're saying this is in that case, they actually have a more specific goal, don't they? Sell more of this stuff, whatever this widget is, I want to sell more. Anything different from the mayonnaise story on doing a sales presentation?
The process is quite similar, although I do realize that not a lot of people are creating presentations in their jobs to explain how mayonnaise is being made. It's often about software.
You said software. Sorry, I've lost you here. Just ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening. Okay, Paul, I think you're coming back. I can hear you a little bit, but your camera has frozen, my friend. So I'm just going to do a quick speed check on my end. This is why I love just speed test or just speed test in Amazon. 700 meg. I'm on fiber. Okay, I got you back, I think. There you are. All right, you disappeared for a while. Was I frozen or were you?
I have no idea.
No
so where do we go?
Well, and side note, isn't it funny that after the pandemic year, words like "were you frozen or was I" have just become normal vocabulary in the lexicon, right? We all know what that means. No, Paul's literally not freezing cold. He was frozen for the MP3 listeners. Well, let's just start with differences in a PowerPoint, a sales presentation versus we want to showcase mayonnaise, because in sales, we have an end goal, which is I want to sell more widgets. So I was asking you, what's the difference between that and building this is how we make mayonnaise presentation?
Exactly. Not a lot of people need to explain how mayonnaise is being made. It's more often about less tangible concepts that we want to explain. And I think the process for us is quite similar. And one of the things that we always start with explaining is the curse of knowledge. So the curse of knowledge.
What was it? Something of knowledge?
The curse of knowledge.
Oh, the curse of knowledge. Okay, this is interesting. Go on. What's the curse of knowledge?
And the curse of knowledge is that it's really hard to, if you understand the concept, it's really hard for you to realize that someone else doesn't understand.
Yeah, I totally agree. You don't know that other people don't know because you know.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Go on then. This is great.
And in order to either sell something or explain something, it's really important for the receiver to understand what you're explaining. So that's whether it's explaining the benefits or explaining the product details. We want to help you to explain that, and that is often also a reason why we are being asked to help create a presentation, since we don't have that curse of knowledge. We look from the outside in, and we can challenge also a concept, or if someone is explaining a service to us, we can ask more questions in order to really get it, and then explain it to someone who will hear it for the first time.
Right.
So that's where we start. So that's where we start in trying to understand the service, and the process to explaining how mayonnaise is being made or how to sell software is quite similar in presentation land. Is that we start with writing down the key topics of the presentation, thinking of a storyline, and then really understanding what the triggers are for your audience, and creating a visual presentation that is really focused on those triggers and explaining what your product is, instead of overloading them with a lot of information and then asking in the end, do you want to buy this?
Right. Curse of knowledge. I love that. I'm totally taking that. That's a big one from this show that you've introduced to the audience, is that the curse of knowledge. I run into this all the time. And it's not just the fact that, so I work in cybersecurity. And so my curse of knowledge certainly will be, try to avoid using vocabulary that is super technical, but there's a caveat. Typically my audiences are fairly technical, right? So that might not matter so much. Here's where the curse of knowledge affects us. We have we have so many products at our company, right? And so we group those products into certain buckets that make sense in our mind. This is the curse of knowledge. This is the beginning of the curse of knowledge, right? So we have traditional network security. Okay, well, network security. Most people in my audience understands what that means. A few people on the outside of my industry might already be stumped. What is network security? Then we have cloud security, and we have all these products in each bucket. So then some genius comes up with a name, and that name will be completely arbitrary because we're trying to think of something cool, right? That's all it is. So we think of a cool name and we're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because if it's cloud, we're going to call it CloudGuard, for example. But then we have other products where we call them Harmony because it works in harmony with other products. Yeah, that's great, Harmony. So then this is where the curse of knowledge fails, right? We start going into the marketplace saying, these Harmony products are amazing. Now, in my mind, I know exactly what Harmony products are. The audience has no clue at all. Curse of knowledge.
And that's also where we come in, because I would definitely ask you, could you explain to me what a Harmony product is? And that would probably also make you realize that that's not a term that everyone understands.
Right. Exactly. That's right. Because I don't know that I've got the curse of knowledge. That's exactly. The other interesting thing about the curse of knowledge, right, is I'm unaware of it. I've been living in, go on.
In all fairness, I did steal I borrowed it from, it's a great book. It's called Made to Stick from Dan and Chip Heath. And,
right, yeah.
In the book, they also explain a really easy way they really explain it on a really cool way, is that when you have a song in your head, and what you do is you knock it on the table like this, and I ask you what that song is, you probably have no idea what it is. And to me, that is so weird, because what I'm actually doing is that when I'm knocking it on the table, in my head, I'm playing the song, and that's all that information that I have that you don't get.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. Exactly. You've got the beat, even if I were to hum it, right? In fact, right. So I love to do, I'm the father of 3 daughters. I love to do activities with my kids when they were young. They've almost all flown the nest now. And when they were younger, I did, big activities. So with one of them, I took piano lessons. Now, as an adult, I can tell you, it was a real struggle. And I was trying for an entire year, this poor instructor that I had. So I was in one room learning, my daughter was in the other. She took off. I mean, kids, right? Mind like a sponge, fantastic. I was trying to play Coldplay's The Scientist. Now, at the end of the year, I went to the recital, all the other kids, I was the only grown up there playing at the recital. I was all very happy with myself. And I tell you what, man, it sounded like The Scientist in my head. So my wife had her phone and she's filming me, and I'm all proud. I'm up there with the kids. I'm doing The Scientist and I'm just banging this thing out. I think it's epic. And then I watched the video afterwards. And it sounds like garbage. It does not sound like The Scientist at all. And I remember getting off stage, doing a little bow, nothing. So that's the point of the curse of knowledge, exactly, is it sounds brilliant in our head. You know, and this is where, a company like yours comes into play. This is where testing it with various audiences comes into play as well. What didn't you understand by the last 10 minutes of what I've just said, right? So that's neat. All right, good man. So where should we go from here, my friend? This is fantastic. I've gotten some real gems. The two big ones right now, I'll recap, and then I'm going to talk about something else with you, is the curse of knowledge. That's a huge one. And the fact that Prezi can have essentially hidden presentations within the presentation. Like, if for the audience really understand that is super powerful. I'm going back to Prezi purely for that reason, right? Is because I don't know, based on audience feedback, what they might want to also learn, but I don't want to bore them with, let's say, numbers that are irrelevant to them. So with Prezi, you could literally ask people during your presentation, is this the direction I need to be going in? And if they say no, which direction should I be going in? You can be prepared for that. And exactly. That, if you're a salesperson, if you're somebody that is just speaking to anyone, will show that, you know, you've done your homework, and people appreciate that. It makes you look dynamic and amazing. So those are the two big keys.
If you talk a bit on that as well, is that so Prezi likes to use the term of conversational presenting. And that is what we are doing when creating those overviews as well, is that we can hide content, but the other thing what we can do is we can actually have a conversation. And in that conversation, we already have all that information stored somewhere in our presentation. And once a topic comes up, we can pull it up, but we don't have to. So that will help you to have a conversation. And that brings me to another really important development in what Prezi has been doing over the years, is that 2 years ago, they created Prezi Video. And what Prezi Video does is that it works the same way as Prezi. However, we don't have the background image, but what we have there is the presenter itself. Okay. So let me see if I can explain this. So now when we are doing a lot of virtual presentations, that tool has become very, very relevant. Because what we tend to do when presenting virtually is that we block ourselves out by screen sharing, and you become minimized to that small box in the corner, and your content will be big on the screen, but you lose that connection with the audience.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So what Prezi Video allows us to do is that instead of screen sharing my content, so let's say I have 4 topics that I want to talk about, they are next to my face. So they are in the same environment as I am as a presenter. And for the audience, they can focus on the presenter and on the content at the same time.
That is very cool. I like that. At the beginning of the pandemic, and for those listening in the future, we're recording this in May of 2021. Luckily, it's coming to a little bit of an end, not quite yet. So let's not relax too quickly, but it's coming to an end. But at the beginning, I thought it was horrific when you would see somebody's tiny little face in the corner box, and then these, numbers. Humans like humans, right? We're good. We're not going to get away from that. So, and I've tried to overcome that problem using multiple cameras. So right now I'm just doing this podcast, so I don't have my setup going, but I have a green screen to my left that extends up on the wall there, and then I have buttons here on a stream deck, and then I hit them, and I actually face a completely different camera. And then that's when I have a huge background that I have essentially used PowerPoint, but it's a lot of fiddling. And it sounds like Prezi would alleviate this problem for me. I've essentially created, I know I'm standing in the middle of a wide screen, and so I'll have one image up here, one image to my right, one image to my left, lower, and I think about these 4 corners. So it sounds like Prezi's doing that. Do you know, so here's an interesting question. For people that haven't used Prezi much, and I really haven't either or even heard of it, why is it sounds superior to PowerPoint, and yet it's not as popular, not by far? Any thoughts on why? Because most people don't use Prezi. In your world, you'll have the, what did you call it from Chip's book? I've forgotten already. You'll have the curse of knowledge, my friend. Yes, your world is your Mr. President, right? The vast majority of people haven't even heard of Prezi. Why?
I think there are some reasons. One of the most important reasons is that everyone is working from a setup where PowerPoint often is pre-installed.
Yeah.
Well, it's the default tool that is already pre-installed and that is on almost everyone's computer. Then we are also trained to work in PowerPoint from the start of our professional lives.
Yeah.
Everyone is really, really busy, and it's hard to take some time out of your day to learn and create to learn a new software.
Right.
And when Prezi was starting out in 2000, well, they started a bit earlier, but it really caught on in 2011, is that Prezi by then was literally that empty canvas and you could do anything. And that scares a lot of people, because when you can do everything, that makes it also harder to structure your story or to create visuals, or it was a bit scary for a lot of people who tested it then. But since then, the tool has evolved immensely, and it's now just as easy as creating a PowerPoint. I can definitely say that.
Is it web-based, or is it software that sits on your computer?
The web-based version is very powerful, and you also have you can also download it and work from your desktop as well. Yeah,
which is helpful because not always nowadays with 5G. It should be like, come on, we've got connectivity anywhere. We're almost there. But yeah, if it's just web-based, and that's also a barrier to entry. I think you're right. We are familiar with the tools that we use. The audience listening to this podcast, however, when it's released, these are people who like to sharpen the saw, right? So these are people that will take the time to do that. And hey, isn't that an amazingly beautiful and simple differentiator for the haves and the have-nots, for the winners versus everyone else? Just keep sharpening the saw and start using Prezi. You'll probably move your presentations to the top 10% of presentations in the world if you're using it mildly well, just because you'll be unique. You'll be different. It won't be the same linear PowerPoint slides. And then what you also said about the blank canvas at the beginning scaring people, that's interesting because PowerPoint has templates. So I regurgitate my thoughts into them. That's kind of easy for me, right? It's like a wizard. I follow along. I'm not the leader. When you are looking at a blank piece of paper, you're taking a leadership position, right? That's emotionally scary, as you say, for people, right? Yes. Any tips on that before we kind of close out with a couple of other things I wanted to mention? What are the tips on it's emotionally scary for people to start with a blank piece of paper? What can you tell people to help boost their confidence, the psychology of it?
Yes, I think, well, and to mention that Prezi has 1,000 templates as well to work with. But the beautiful thing is that when you're starting with that empty piece of paper, it really comes down to the essence of what you want to start telling. And that's also, a lot of people get distracted when they're starting to create a presentation. They start procrastinating because they open up PowerPoint and they start selecting fonts. And some suggestions. And hey, it says animations. Okay, let's do something with animations. And then all your focus leaves the attention of the story that you're actually telling. But it does take time. And it is a really beautiful experience to present and be aware of the fact that you've created this yourself. And when that really works, when that really connects with your audience, and when you make people enthusiastic about what you're telling, and if you've created that from the start on, and if it really connects, that feeling, it's definitely worth investing the time in creating your presentation.
It's beautiful, man. Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So at the preamble, before we went live, you and I were talking a little bit about some of the challenges. So complete side note and a little tip that I want you to give to the audience, because I think this might be cool. I'm looking at my camera right now, right? It's an external camera. It's not part of my laptop. My laptop camera would be here. I'm looking at this camera here. I'm not looking at you. There's a disadvantage to that. It's good for the audience because I'm looking directly at you, for those people looking at the MP4 on the website. But the disadvantage is that I don't see the facial expression of my guest. Now, you mentioned something, and I think you put it in the chat here. What was it that can overcome that for us?
Yes. So I found about this a week ago, and it solved the problem that I'm having, is that am I looking at the person I'm presenting to or at the camera. So I tend to switch. And during this talk, I tried to look as much in the camera as I could, but then I couldn't see myself. So there's this really easy to understand tool. It's called PlexiCam. It's made from plexiglass. And then what you do is if you have a separate camera, you can put that camera on sort of a shelf and you can move that over your entire screen so you can add it to exact the spot where you're also looking at your audience.
Kind of like a teleprompter, So that's fantastic. Good man. Look, this is what this show is all about. Tips, tricks, right? Paul, this was an amazing show for me. Ladies and gentlemen, as a keynote speaker, you're always looking for differentiators. Especially since COVID, there's thousands of people that call themselves keynote speakers on LinkedIn, right? It's like, how do you differentiate yourself? We're swimming in what I call a red ocean. It's a shark feeding frenzy. You want to swim to the blue ocean, meaning that in the blue ocean, there's less competition. One of the ways to do that is simply by using a completely different presentation platform. So sharpen the saw by playing with Prezi. And then Paul, if people want to get your help, where can they find you? What are your socials?
So look for us on LinkedIn. The name is Mr. President, and that's mr.president.com. You can find us online there or on our LinkedIn. And you can look for us on YouTube as well. And we have a lot of examples of the presentations we've created and some talks on how to create great presentations yourself.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we should wrap up the show here. Paul, stay right there because I want to chat with you after we're off air just to thank you again. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for volunteering. It is really kind of you for dialing in from the Netherlands. So appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on one of my other shows, the Tech Town Square, we are interviewing a former KGB agent. So we're going to find out how he was explaining very complicated subject matter to whatever audiences he was spying on. So that'll be an interesting one for us. And I'll be back with another show shortly in the same theme of cybersecurity, actually, that one, talking to somebody who has 3 million followers on LinkedIn about how to communicate the very complicated idea of cybersecurity safety to the layperson. How do we do that? And right now, this is just a few days after a massive ransomware attack on a pipeline on the east coast of the United States. There are currently lineups of cars miles long in North Carolina where gas stations have run out of gas. So we'll be discussing the importance of having good cyber hygiene so that threat actors can't hack companies and people. And we'll be back with another episode the week after that has nothing to do with cybersecurity at all. So good luck, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again, Paul. This was a really cool show. Much appreciated. All right.